This is the Building Automation Monthly Podcast with Phil Zito, episode 137. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to episode 137 of the Building Automation Monthly Podcast. In this episode, we are going to be discussing 3 sales strategies that can help you create a renewable revenue source for your building automation business. So I got a question for you. Have you ever sold a plan and specification job and then you've never heard from the customer again? And the reality is, if we're being honest, some companies prefer that. They prefer to go and execute their project and sit there quietly in the corner during the 12-month warranty period, hoping they don't get any calls so that they can go and close out that project and collect the margin that they were supposed to collect for that project. But here's the reality. If you're doing that, if that is your mentality, you are doing your customer and ultimately your business a huge disservice by not continuing to serve your customers after your projects. Having been through the Great Recession, I think that's what it's called, of 2008, the customers who we were serving at the time continued to do business with us on the operational side, even though they had no capital projects. Now, some of our competitors who were working against us, they didn't focus on the customer relationship, and because of that, they had no work when that happened. They had no way. They started having to let people go, and we were growing. So how does that happen? How do you get to the point where you can have a customer that, even when the economy has a downturn, is still going to go and do business with you? So recently I was talking with one of our owner customers who's purchased our training programs, and I was working with him on this, essentially just talking through a engagement that he is working on. I'm trying to not talk too specifically about it because it's not on the street yet, but basically is going through a process of wanting some more service from his BAS provider. Problem is that after repeatedly asking for increased service, he was given options like, hey, we'll come vacuum your control panels. We're going to back up your databases and clear alarms for you. I mean, talk about useless stuff. It's almost as if this BAS provider wasn't even trying to provide value, or at least that's what our customer felt. And the reality is that the customer didn't know what he wanted. He just knew that he didn't have enough folks to execute the work, that he was having a lot of trouble finding folks in his neck of the woods who could work on his building systems. He had some older building systems and some newer building systems and was just struggling to go and make this all work. And then you see companies out there who they have customers, and I see this time and time again through our relationships with customers as we provide them training. And when I say customers, I mean owners, because we serve owners, we serve engineers, and we serve building automation companies. But I see this time and time again, especially from owners, where they are struggling. They want help, but the only option they're given is a BAS software upgrade, or let's give you some 40 hours of planned service, and the guy's going to clear alarms and back up databases and go through and make sure points aren't offline. But in reality, what value does that really provide? I mean, the days of going and selling post-contract service and selling 40 hours of, hey, we're going to back stuff up and do alarm clearing and software upgrades, those days are disappearing, because the reality is, back when that was the modus operandi to go and sell those kind of services, it was because, if we're really honest with each other, if we were sitting down having a beer and being completely honest, it's because we didn't have anything else to sell. We really didn't have any technology, at least technology that was affordable, that we could provide after the project to customers. I mean, analytics back in the day, way too expensive. Going and doing anything with integration, I mean, forget about it. Because one, it would get written out of the spec as quick as possible because of value engineering. But two, then going to try to sell quote unquote integration, that was seen as, something fancy. That was a Rolls Royce when everyone else wanted, a Toyota Camry or Honda Accord or Ford Taurus, something like that. So how in today's age do we provide value to customers? Well, first, let's talk about what value even means to today's owners. Now, what I'm about to share with you is based on feedback we've gotten when we asked the question, what are the biggest pains to your operations business right now? And these seem to be fairly universal regardless of the vertical market. Sure, we heard some specifics related to healthcare, transportation, commercial real estate, K through 12 higher ed. But outside of those vertical market specific pains, we heard 4 pains that customers were looking for some help on. And one was the push from capital to operational budgets. Now, at first glance, if you're looking at this, you may go, oh man, my ability to provide service to a customer is going to be greatly diminished because I'm limited in what I can put in. But with some of the technologies we have today, cloud hosting of BAS servers, analytics that have monthly rates, all sorts of structures and softwares that we can put in place that depend more on the operational budget than the capital budget. You see, after 2008, spending a lot of money on capital is very concerning. So folks are shifting to using operational budgets that they can then shed. The theory is that if they buy something once, that's a sunk cost. Or they can go and they can keep their capital and then they can run it off an operational budget. And by doing that, if the economy were to tank or something were to happen, they could go and unload those services and not be at risk of having gone and spent their capital. So that's one of the pains folks are feeling. How do they do that with building automation? The other, and this is universal across the board, is a lack of talent pool. Now, for a very forward-thinking building automation company, a lack of talent pool in your customer base is actually quite a good thing, because that is something that with the right systems, which we now can provide because the technology is there, we can actually support customers regionally and globally. And we see this in some building automation companies that are running operations centers or remote support centers or outsourced services. And this is something that if I were a betting man, I would bet is going to increase dramatically, which is essentially just like when IT went through its big shift from internal IT to utilizing external resources. I think we're going to see a use of external resources for some of the building operations. I think you'll still have hands-on stuff done on site, but as far as software, as far as database, as far as retro commissioning, as far as ensuring the system is optimized, I think you'll see more and more of that being sent off-site, just due to the fact that those tasks often don't often don't necessitate a full-time employee. The third pain that we heard is aging systems. Now, I mean, this is universal, right? We've been hearing this since I started in this career. It's that, building automation systems, they're 20, 30-year systems. We're going to install them. We're going to put them in the janitor's closet. It's going to run forever. Why do we need to upgrade? I don't even use the system. But nowadays, folks are running into where the product life cycle is so short. It used to be 10, 20 years between product lines. Now we're seeing product lines that have product life cycles of 5 years. And if all of the other technology sectors are a trend at all, we're going to see this continue to decrease. I don't think it'll ever get to the point where it's less than 3 years, but the fact is that we are starting to adopt more technology. And so we are going to see where technology is just advancing at a pace that it makes sense to retrofit the technology. Now, that may not be physical retrofit. That may actually be changing the software. And then finally, the fourth pain we're seeing this across the board, is an increase in controllability expectations. You've got an entire generation that is used to doing everything instantly on their phone. Whether you like it or not, that's the reality. You've got smart homes that are becoming the norm, smart cars, etc. And then we have these stupid buildings. I mean, literally buildings that you still have to walk over to the wall and touch the thermostat. And we're getting to a point where the expectation of controllability is existing in the residential sector. And that is going to translate, and some of our owner customers are seeing it already translate, especially on the commercial real estate side, into expectations of the folks that they are serving within the building. So with those three pains in mind, what can you go and do as a sales professional? What services can you provide, and how do you provide them? And what objections can you expect to receive when you start to provide these services? So we're going to start at the simplest first, and then we are going to gradually move to more complex services that require more of an investment by your company to actually utilize. So the first is post-contract optimization. As I mentioned, we are seeing a push from capital to operational budget. It is getting to the point where value engineering is becoming increasingly the go-to method for dealing with cost overruns on projects. Because of the fact that financial leaders have more oversight on project funding than ever before, the ability to provide post-contract optimization is becoming an increasingly attractive option for owner customers. Being able to go and look at a customer site, especially with some of the control lines that come pre-canned with analytics out of the box, being able to look at trends, look at analytics, and then make recommendations around optimization and build a ROI case around that optimization is a skill that, if developed, gives you an opportunity to go and offer retrofit or optimization services post-contract. And the beauty of this is that this is work that you're not typically competing for. It's not on the street. It definitely meets our number one expectation, which is customer value. Everything I'm going to teach you in this episode is all going to be focused on customer value, because if you provide customer value, you can be profitable as long as the value you're providing is more than the cost of your services. If you can show a way for you to 4x the return on investment, 10x the return on investment, then that's something you can repeat. Now, granted, people don't just buy logically, they buy emotionally, which is why you need to have a relationship during the construction process as well as after it. But with all that being said, there are plenty of opportunities in all of the new construction work, especially across the United States, where you can go and provide post-contract optimization. So how do you do this? How do you execute post-contract optimization? Well, it begins first with collecting the right data up front. So this means working with your operational team to understand what data they would need in order to optimize. Once you know that, and once you have an idea on some of the things you could optimize, we're talking demand control, ventilation, discharge air reset, trim and response, things like that, sequencing, graphics optimization so that you can increase workflow efficiency, meaning that they can get to the problem faster. These are all ways you can optimize a project after it's been built. So you go and build this post-contract optimization service, and it's really simple as long as it becomes a process where the required information gets collected during the construction process. And then you simply follow up post-warranty or during the warranty period and you provide an optimization service option to your customers. I'm telling you, I can't count how many owners have said that this is a service that if it provided a proven ROI, they would entertain because they could go and look at it in their operational budget. Which then brings us to, no. Let's not go there yet. Let's talk about objections. When you tend to get objections around post-contract optimization, it tends to be because you haven't provided solid evidence of ROI. This is where past case studies becomes important. The reality is the first one or two of these opportunities you may have to do at cost just to overcome the fear of folks who have not been serviced by this in the past. Once you've gotten a couple case studies that prove that your process works, then you can have that proof to utilize as part of your ROI. Also, you need to get comfortable with ROI calculations. You need to get comfortable with understanding your customer's business. How do they calculate costs? And then how are you going to fit your costs into their ROI model? So that's really important. That's not something that's typically taught. So the objections tend to be around that right there. They disagree with your ROI projections. That's fine. Have them help create the ROI projections with you. I mean, that's basic sales 101, right? Have the customer create the ROI with you because one, they are engaged in the process. They are going to see it. And if the ROI is there, they'll see it. If it's not there, they'll see that as well. I believe in transparency and being upfront with people. So with that being said, we move on to our capability number 2 or sales strategy number 2, which is continuous and monitoring based commissioning. This isn't just for commissioning agents anymore. The fact that you are able to utilize new IP controls that have built-in trending, alarming, and analytics, you're able to have at your fingertips a series of data that either through continuous commissioning where the system self-adjusts, which is not very common, or monitoring-based commissioning, which is much more common, where you get data that is reported out, and then through a process, you offer a predefined service cost to make changes based on this monitoring-based commissioning. That's one way, which goes back to our post-contract optimization. The second way is to actually just provide the monitoring-based commissioning as a service, as a subscription service, and then the owner themselves takes action on it. I will tell you, though, that the majority of owners really are going to go down the post-contract optimization path because a lot of folks I've run into outside of the higher ed and maybe the corporate campuses, they tend to purchase monitoring-based commissioning, but they tend to not act on it. They just go overwhelmed. So you really want to make sure that you've got that tightly coupled, the monitoring-based commissioning with the ability to go service them based on the actions that are detected from that monitoring-based commissioning. Now, some of the objections that you'll tend to get will be, why is this not included in the project? Well, because it wasn't spec'd and it was value engineered out. That's a whole nother podcast episode on spec influence and building value in the spec up front and having that owner or engineer relationship to make sure it doesn't get value engineered out. But with that being said, that is one objection that you'll hear, and it's actually very easy to deal with. The second objection you'll hear is, hey, we're barely hanging in. We're struggling to just do our reactive maintenance. I'm sure you've heard this time and time again, every time you've provided analytics offerings or some form of commissioning. How are we going to do this? How can we do more if we're barely able to do it now? And that is why you want to couple this monitoring-based commissioning with a strategy where you're actually going and providing the service to do this. These are important things that you need to think through. If their objection is that they're overwhelmed and they're missing stuff because they're overwhelmed, then it seems like the logical solution that if there is a proven ROI and that this can actually result in a benefit for them, that you provide the service so that gradually they dig themselves out of that hole. It's kind of like that old saying, what do you do when you're in a hole? You stop digging. That brings us to option number 3, or sales strategy number 3, which is outsourced operations. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. This one has so many emotional and political landmines associated to it. I mean, you've got folks who have devoted their life to working in facility operations, and you're saying, hey, we're going to outsource stuff. I mean, that is not a fun conversation to have. The reality is there is so much work in most facilities that is not being executed that the folks in the facilities can still continue to execute their jobs, and you only outsource specific parts of those tasks that simply do not make sense to have in-house. So for example, advanced programming, going and being able to do advanced troubleshooting, those are things that you can outsource, and then that outsourced provider is going to go and say, hey, you know, I looked at this, I found this issue, and then the on-site person goes and takes care of it. This is great for commercial real estate. This is great for K through 12 solutions. The reality, though, of this strategy is that it takes a lot of work to put in place. Whereas with post-contract optimization and continuous and monitoring-based commissioning, both of those can be done with relatively low investment upfront cost on the building automation contractor's end. You know, it's just a matter of changing your processes, checking a couple boxes when you're doing your actual setup of your building automation system. Outsourced operations is a completely different model. It requires different staffing models. It requires you having a technology set, remote access to your customers, but it also provides a tightly coupled relationship with your owner that provides immense value. Quite often, by splitting the cost of an employee across multiple customers where you're running this outsourced operations model, you can provide a cost that is on par to one of their in-house employees or actually below, and you're providing a tremendous service. And then, properly positioned and utilized, the customer still gets to keep the same amount of employees and gets to go and have that quote unquote assurance that if talent pool were to shrink or someone were to leave, that they would have someone who understands their facility who could help them continue to operate it. Now, as I mentioned, the objections you're going to get here are largely emotional and political and are much less capital-based usually. When you tend to go and provide anything that could potentially threaten someone's job, you need to be aware of that. And the reality is that we need to embrace efficiency, but you can also embrace efficiency and this outsourced operations model and still go and help your customers utilize the staff they have. So that's going to be your challenge as a sales professional, is to really understand how the customer is utilizing their existing staff. This is where you have to spend the time and really understand how they utilize the staff, how they perform their operations. And you need to look for the areas in which you can provide advantages, in which you can potentially take a load off them so that they can focus on their core tasks and you can focus on the core tasks that your business is good at. So my hope is that these 3 sales strategies started turning the wheels. I mean, there's many more. Originally, I had 5 in this episode, but just executing any one of these 3 strategies will provide tremendous results for your building automation business. I mean, there's a lot more, right? There's cloud hosting BAS services. There's going and providing integration services where you tie in a facility management or maintenance management software and you help them build out a better maintenance process. There's ways in which you go and you actually provide services where you are going and basically, what's the word I'm looking for here? Leasing out controls. I mean, that is a way. I've only seen a handful of companies do this, and they mostly do it tied to energy services projects or some sort of multi-year operational model, but where you actually lease out controls or you lease out labor, and it's like they buy the BAS and then after a couple of years they get upgraded. So that is another model. Now that is a very cutting edge model that not a lot of places are implementing, but I foresee that being very popular in the near future. So with that being said, like I mentioned, I hope this starts to spin the wheels inside your head, give you some ideas that you could talk about with your sales management, or if you are the sales management, you could talk through with your sales team. And this gives you some strategies that you can apply to provide greater value to your owners. Because if you do that, if you provide first year value, you will have very profitable business. That's how we've built our business. That's something I'll be talking about in our upcoming episode where I talk through our first year in business and how we've grown as rapidly as we have. And I will tell you, it all has to do with focusing on customer outcomes and service, which is something that seems to be ignored these days in our world because no one's hungry for work because there's more work than they could possibly do. And so you're starting to see quality of service start to degrade. And that is going to come back to bite a lot of companies in the butt when the market corrects, which it will eventually, as we know from history. So with that being said, everything I've covered in today's episode is available at buildingautomationmonthly.com/137. Once again, that's buildingautomationmonthly.com/137. And I ask that if you've gotten value of our podcast, so if this has helped you to grow your business, share it with one person. Let them know about how Building Automation Monthly has provided value to you and how it will provide value to them. Thanks a ton. And by the way, depending on when you're listening to this, I will be at the Honeywell Momentum Conference. I'll be talking about how to design an IP controls network and how to sell IP controls. So if you are at that conference, feel free to stop in and say hi, and I'd love to meet you. Thanks a ton for listening, and I look forward to talking to you all again next week. Take care.